In 1954, a man named Walter Hensley in Akron, Ohio, rehung a sagging kitchen door using a wooden matchstick, a drop of yellow glue, and the back end of a screwdriver. The fix took 4 minutes. That door swung clean and true for the next 38 years. When his grandson finally replaced the hinges in 1992, the matchstick was still seated in the screw hole exactly where Walter had driven it. The grandson did not know what it was. He threw it away, and with it, he threw away a repair that every man on that block in 1954 could have done in his sleep. They fixed everything, not because they enjoyed it, because the alternative was sitting in a broken house waiting for a man with a truck who might not come for 3 days. There was a toolbox on a shelf in the basement and a decision that got made before breakfast: handle it or go without. We replaced that entire mindset with a credit card and a phone number. The phone number costs more every year. The mindset is gone. Number 21 on this list stops a leak with a piece of leather cut from an old belt and costs nothing. Number 14 held a workshop bench solid for 42 years, using a joint that requires no screws and no nails. And number 3 was so common in 1950s American homes that a man who could not do it was quietly considered a stranger to his own house. These 25 secrets were not handyman tricks. They were the working vocabulary of a generation that refused to be defeated by anything small. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 25 lost handyman secrets from the 1950s our grandfathers swore by that nobody teaches anymore. Number 25, the matchstick screw repair. Every grandfather knew this before he knew his own phone number. A stripped screw hole in a door frame, a cabinet hinge, a chair leg. None of it required a new piece of wood. You broke a wooden matchstick into 2 or 3 slivers. You dipped the broken ends in yellow wood glue. You pushed them into the empty hole until it was packed tight. You snapped off the excess flush with the surface. You waited an hour. Then you drove the screw back in. The wood swelled around the new fibers and seated harder than the original. For a father in 1955 with 3 children and a kitchen door that would not stay closed, this was a 4-minute fix that cost nothing and outlasted the house. He did not call anyone. He had matches. The repair held longer than the marriage that lived behind that door. Number 24, sharpening a hand saw with a triangular file. You clamped the saw between 2 boards in a vise, set the file at the exact angle of the existing tooth, and drew it across each tooth in sequence with the same pressure every stroke. Then you turned the saw and worked the alternate teeth from the other side. A boy in 1952 learned to do this by age 12 because a dull saw was a failure of character, not just a tool. The file cost 40 cents. The skill cost an afternoon of standing next to your father. A sharp hand saw cut faster and straighter than most circular saws sold today. The saw is still in the basement. The file is too. The hands that knew the angle are gone. Number 23, setting a chisel with a wooden mallet. You marked the line with a pencil. You scored it lightly with the chisel held vertical. You set the cutting edge inside the line, beveled side facing the waist. Then you tapped, never struck, tapped, with a wooden mallet until the wood lifted out clean. A cabinet maker in 1956 cut a perfect mortise in 8 minutes using nothing but a 1-inch chisel and a mallet his father had turned on a foot-powered lathe. The joint the chisel produced was tighter than any joint a router can make today. The router is faster. The joint is not better. His hands knew the wood would split if struck, so he tapped. Number 22, leveling a workbench with paper shims. You set the bench in place. You set a marble on it. You watched which way the marble rolled. You folded a piece of brown paper twice and slid it under the low leg. You checked the marble again. You added another fold or pulled one away until the marble sat still. A man in 1953 leveled the most important surface in his life, the bench he would work on for 40 years, using a marble and a grocery bag. No laser, no bubble, just the patient willingness to make something true. The bench is still level. The grocery bag rotted in 1968. The level held. Number 21. The leather faucet washer. Before rubber became cheap and standard, every kitchen drawer held a small square of old belt leather. When a faucet dripped, you closed the supply valve, unscrewed the packing nut, lifted the stem, and pried the worn washer off the bottom. You cut a fresh disc from the leather with a pocket knife, the exact diameter of the valve seat. You pressed it into place. You reassembled. The drip stopped. Total time, 4 minutes. Total cost, nothing. For a widow in 1957 in suburban Detroit who could not afford a plumber and would not ask her brother-in-law, this was the difference between a quiet kitchen and a kitchen that reminded her every night of what she could not fix. She fixed it. The leather held for 9 years. A 5-cent disc of leather held back a $40 service call. That was not thrift. That was intelligence. Number 20. Pulling and straightening bent nails. You held the bent nail flat against an anvil, a vice jaw, or the back of a heavy shovel. You tapped it with the side of a hammer, rotating it a quarter turn between each tap. 3 or 4 corrections and the nail was straight enough to drive clean. You kept them in a coffee can next to the workbench. Every job started with a handful from that can before you opened a new box. A carpenter in 1951 considered throwing away a bent nail a moral failure, not a convenience. His son carries the same coffee can in his garage today. It has not been emptied in 70 years. The nail was not junk. It was a resource that had not yet finished its job. Number 19. Resealing a window with linseed oil putty. You scraped the old cracked putty out of the sash with a putty knife. You warmed a wad of fresh linseed oil putty between your palms until it was soft and pliable. You pressed it into the channel between the glass and the wood frame. You drew the putty knife along the joint at a steady angle, leaving a clean, beveled bead. You let it cure for 2 weeks before painting. A father in 1956 reglazed every window in a 3-bedroom house in a single Saturday for the cost of 1 can of putty. That seal held 40 years. Modern caulk in a tube fails in 7 years. The putty cured slow. That was why it lasted. Number 18. The penny voltage tester. Before non-contact testers were sold in every hardware store, electricians and capable homeowners tested whether a circuit was live by touching a thin copper wire between the suspect terminal and a known ground while watching for a spark. A grandfather in 1958 did this with the casual confidence of a man who understood exactly what the spark meant and exactly what would happen if his other hand was wet. The skill required understanding, not equipment. The understanding is what we lost, not the wire. The knowledge of when the wire was safe and when it was not. Number 17. Patching plaster with newspaper and joint compound. You knocked the loose plaster out of the crack until you reached sound material. You crumpled newspaper, dampened it, and packed it into the hole as a backer. You troweled joint compound over the newspaper, feathering the edges out 6 inches in every direction. You let it dry overnight. You sanded it smooth. You painted it. For a mother in 1955 whose son had put a chair leg through the parlor wall, This was a $2 repair that erased the evidence by Sunday dinner. The chair leg was forgiven. The wall did not remember. There are men alive right now in the small towns of this country who can do every repair on this list before they have finished their first cup of coffee. They are in their late 80s. They are dying at a rate of roughly 1,200 a day. When they go, they take with them something that is not in any book: the muscle memory that knows the difference between a joint that is tight and a joint that is 1/4 turn from splitting. The information can be written down. The instinct cannot. The instinct came from standing next to a father who had stood next to his own father in 1928 in a workshop that smelled of cut pine and machine oil, watching a hand drive a chisel without ever measuring the angle. That chain of watching is breaking. We are not recording it. We are not standing next to anyone. The hands that built half the homes in this country are folding for the last time, and the rooms where they worked are being cleared out by grandchildren who do not know what most of the tools are for. Number 16, cleaning paintbrushes with a comb and turpentine. You worked the brush against the bottom of a coffee can full of turpentine until the bristles released their paint. You drew a metal comb through the bristles from ferrule to tip, removing dried particles. You wrapped the clean brush in heavy brown paper tied with string to dry flat. A man in 1954 owned 3 paintbrushes for 40 years because he cleaned them this way after every job. A natural bristle brush from Sears cost $3. The same brush today costs $25 and is thrown away after one use because nobody owns a comb or buys turpentine. He did not own more brushes. He owned the same brushes for longer. Number 15, the string line plumb check. You drove a small nail into the top of a door frame. You tied a length of string to the nail. You tied a heavy washer or a steel nut to the bottom of the string. You let it hang free. You measured the distance from the string to the frame at the top and the bottom. If the numbers matched, the frame was plumb. If they did not, you knew exactly how much to shim and where. A carpenter in 1953 framed an entire house using nothing but a string, a washer, and a steel measuring tape. The house is still standing. The walls are still plumb. The level he never owned would have agreed with the string. Number 14, the dovetail joint cut by hand. You marked the angles with a sliding bevel. You cut the tails first with a backsaw, working to the waist side of the line. You chiseled out the waist between the tails. You used the tails as a template to mark the pins on the matching board. You cut and chiseled the pins. You drove the joint together dry with a wooden mallet. If it fit, you knocked it apart, glued the surfaces, and reassembled it. A cabinet maker in 1956 cut 12 perfect dovetails in a single drawer in under 30 minutes. That drawer has been opened and closed an estimated 200,000 times since. The joint has never loosened. There are no screws in it. There are no nails. There is only the shape of the wood, locked into itself by the patience of a man who would not accept a weaker joint. Number 13, the wedge and handle axe repair. You burned the old broken handle stub out of the axe head over a fire. You shaped a new handle from hickory using a draw knife. You fitted the head to the handle with a steel wedge driven into a kerf cut in the top of the handle. You soaked the assembled head in linseed oil for 2 days. A mountain man in 1952 in eastern Kentucky rehandled an axe in an afternoon for the cost of nothing. The handle lasted a decade. A factory replacement handle from the hardware store lasted 18 months. The difference was not the hickory. The difference was the phi-t. His hands tapered the handle until it seated by feel, not by gauge. Number 12. The candle wax drawer slide. You opened the sticking drawer, you rubbed a candle along the wooden runners until they were coated. You worked the drawer in and out a few times to distribute the wax. The drawer slid silent and smooth for the next 8 years. A grandmother in 1955 kept a single white candle in the kitchen junk drawer for exactly this purpose. Every drawer in the house glided. No oil, no spray. A nickel candle did the work of a $15 can of silicone lubricant that has not yet been invented. The wax was not magic. It was knowledge. Number 11. The two-board straightedge. You needed a straight reference longer than any ruler in the shop. You took 2 long boards. You set them on edge against each other. You held them up to the light. Any gap between them showed exactly where one or both were bowed. You planed the high spots down until no light passed between them. You now had 2 straight edges of any length you wanted. A carpenter in 1957 checked every board he installed against a pair of these. The walls in that house are still straight. The trick required no purchase. It required understanding what straight actually meant. Number 10. Soldering a copper pipe joint. You cleaned both pipe and fitting with emery cloth until the copper shone like a new penny. You brushed flux on both mating surfaces. You assembled the joint. You heated the fitting with a propane torch, not the pipe. You touched the solder to the joint, never to the flame. The solder melted on contact and was drawn into the joint by capillary action, creating a bright ring all the way around in 12 seconds. A man in 1955 plumbed his entire basement bathroom over a long weekend using a torch, a roll of solder, and the knowledge of where to put the heat. That bathroom is still in service. The joints have never leaked. Capillary action does not know what decade it is. In 1958, the average American household spent less than $25 a year on outside home repair services. In 2023, that figure exceeded $3,000. The houses did not get harder to fix. They got easier. Power tools became cheaper. Materials became more forgiving. Information became free and instantaneous, and yet the bill went up by a factor of more than 100. The reason is documented and uncomfortable. The home services and repair industry in the United States generates over $600 billion a year. That industry does not survive if you can patch your own plaster, solder your own pipe, or rehang your own door. So an entire cultural infrastructure was built. Magazines, advertising, manufacturers, school curricula to convince Americans that these tasks were beneath them. Too dangerous, too complicated, better left to a professional. The professional charges by the hour. The hour gets more expensive every year. Your grandfather's hands were a threat to a business model that did not exist when he learned them. That is exactly why no one is teaching you what he knew. Number 9. The pencil mark wood. Scribe. You needed to fit a board against an uneven wall. You held the board in place. You took a pencil flat against the wall and drew it down the length of the board, transferring every bump, dip, and curve of the wall to the wood. You cut along the pencil line with a coping saw. The board sat flush against the wall as if the two had grown together. A Finnish carpenter in 1956 fit baseboard in an old farmhouse this way in a single afternoon. Modern carpenters install quarter round to hide the gaps because they do not know how to scribe. The line told the saw exactly where to go. The saw obeyed. Number 8. Tightening a loose chair wrung with hot water. You found the loose rung where it met the leg of the chair. You wrapped a wet cloth around the joint. You poured boiling water over the cloth and let it sit for 20 minutes. The wood swelled. The joint tightened. The chair was solid again. A father in 1953 fixed every dining chair in the house twice a year using a kettle from the stove. He did not glue. He did not drill. He swelled the wood back to its original tightness. The chair was not broken. It was thirsty. He gave it a drink. Number 7, the flux and rosin radio repair. Every grandfather in 1955 owned a soldering iron and a small tin of rosin flux. When a radio went silent, he opened the back, looked for the cold solder joint, the dull gray one among the shiny silver ones, touched it with flux, reheated it with the iron, and watched it flow bright again. The radio came back on. The repair took 3 minutes and cost nothing. A new tube was a different problem. A cold joint was a 5-cent fix. He did not understand circuitry. He understood that something cold needed to be hot again. Number 6, the auger bit resharpening. You clamped the auger bit upright in a vise. You filed the cutting spurs with a small triangular file, working only the inside face. You filed the cutting lips with the same file, maintaining the original angle. You did not touch the lead screw. A drill that had bored 500 holes was returned to as sharp as new in under 5 minutes. A carpenter in 1957 owned 6 auger bits for his hand brace and used the same 6 for 40 years. The bits are still in the wooden case. They are still sharp. The file is in the same drawer. The hands are gone. Number 5, the chalk line snap. You held one end of a string coated in colored chalk at one corner of a board. Your helper, or a nail, held the other end at the opposite corner. You lifted the string straight up 6 inches and let it snap back down. A perfectly straight chalk line appeared on the wood, ready to cut along. A man in 1954 laid out 100 sheets of plywood in a morning with nothing but a chalk box and a partner. Laser lines exist now. They cost $200 and need batteries. The chalk box cost 90 cents. It worked in any light and never needed charging. The line was true. That was all it needed to be. Number 4. Recaning a chair seat with wet reed. You soaked the reed in warm water for an hour until it was pliable. You wove it through the holes in the chair frame in the classic 7-step pattern, front to back, side to side, front to back again, side to side again, and 3 diagonal passes. You let it dry. The reed shrank as it dried and pulled the seat tight as a drum. A grandmother in 1952 recaned every chair in the kitchen using reed bought for $2 at the hardware store. The seats held 25 years of meals, arguments, and grandchildren. The pattern was older than the country. She knew it without thinking. Number 3, the hinge card door realignment. A door that had begun to scrape along its top edge did not need a new door, new hinges, or a planer. It needed a cardboard shim. You unscrewed the bottom hinge from the frame. You cut a small rectangle of thin cardboard the same size as the hinge plate. You slipped the cardboard behind the hinge as a shim. You drove the screws back in. The bottom hinge now sat slightly proud. The top of the door swung up and clear. The scrape was gone. A grandfather in 1956 carried this trick to every house he ever entered. It worked every time. The door was not warped. The frame was not failing. One hinge had shifted a 1/16 of an inch. A piece of cardboard from a cereal box restored everything. That was not a repair. That was a man telling his house that he was still in charge. Number 2, sharpening a pocket knife on the bottom of a coffee mug. Every ceramic mug has an unglazed ring on the bottom where it sits on the table. That ring is fine grit ceramic. A grandfather in 1955 dragged the edge of his pocket knife across that ring at a steady angle, alternating sides, until the blade shaved the hair off the back of his hand. The whole operation took 2 minutes. He never owned a sharpening stone. He never needed one. The mug was already in the cupboard. The knife was already in his pocket. What he had between them was the knowledge that any hard, flat, slightly abrasive surface would put an edge on steel if you understood the angle. He understood the angle. He had understood it since 1932. Number 1. Looking at the problem before doing anything else. That is the whole secret. Before the tool came out of the box, before the trip to the hardware store, before any motion at all, he stood in front of the broken thing and he looked at it. He touched it. He moved the parts. He listened for the sound it made when he wiggled the joint. He found the loose screw, the worn washer, the cracked joint, the small thing that had shifted. 9 times out of 10, the repair was a quarter turn, a tap, a single small action that he had seen his own father perform in 1928. The skill was not in the hands. It was in the patience to look first, to believe that the broken thing was understandable, to refuse to call anyone until he had given himself the same chance any professional would have given the same problem. That belief was once the default setting of the American household. It does not require a certificate. It never did. None of these 25 secrets required a workshop full of power tools or a weekend course or a subscription to anything. They required a willingness to look closely at a broken thing and believe, without anyone's permission, that you could make it work again. That belief was not taught in any school. It was transmitted in workshops and basements and garages by men who had been raised in homes where calling for help was the last option, not the first. Those workshops are being cleared out now. The tools are being sold by the box at estate sales for less than the original price. The hands that owned them are being folded for the last time in funeral homes across this country. We did not lose the tools. The tools are still here. We lost the men who stood beside us when we were 10 years old and said, "Watch. I will only show you once." And we lost the patience to listen the first time. Some of it can still be recovered. The tools are in the basement. The matchstick is in the kitchen drawer. The coffee can of bent nails is on the shelf in the garage. Pick one up. Start there. Your hands will remember things you did not know they knew.